Your body doesn't care that it's 6 p.m. It cares what happened at 2 p.m., at 4 p.m., and in the 40 minutes before you took your last bite, because there's a biological sequence that either gets activated the moment you stop eating, or quietly gets skipped entirely, and most people never know which one is happening to them. It's one overlooked window that determines whether your belly fat is actually being broken down tonight or just sitting there. And the strange part is, the people who accidentally get this right aren't doing more. They're doing something slightly different right at the start that changes everything that follows. Once you see what your body is actually doing in those first few hours after 6 p.m., stopping at that time will either mean something completely new to you, or you'll realize you've been leaving the most important part on the table every single night. Real quick before we get into it, always check with your doctor before making significant changes to your fasting routine or diet, especially if you have underlying health conditions. What I share here is educational based on research and real experience, not personalized medical advice. Now let's get into it. Let me ask you something. You stop eating at 6 p.m., you hit your window, you go to bed feeling disciplined, maybe even a little proud of yourself, and the next morning, nothing. The scale hasn't moved. The belly is exactly where it was, and you're thinking, what is the point? I've had this conversation with more guys than I can count. Guys doing everything right on paper. Consistent windows, real discipline, no cheating, and the belly just sits there, like it didn't get the memo. Here's what nobody told them. The 6 p.m. stop matters, but it's the least important part of what happens next. What actually determines whether tonight's fast burns that belly fat or just burns the clock? That happens in a sequence, and most guys are walking straight through it without knowing it exists. Picture 3 shift workers clocking in at exactly 6 p.m. Each one has a completely different job. Each one either cooperates with your fat-burning goals or quietly works against them. And here's the thing, you don't get to choose which one shows up. Your choices from the previous 4 hours already made that decision for you. The first worker is insulin. At 6 p.m., if your last meal had any significant carbs, bread, rice, pasta, a protein bar with hidden sugar, even fruit, insulin is still on the clock, still finishing the delivery job it started. While insulin is working, fat burning is on hold. Your body is in receiving mode, not releasing mode, so your 6 p.m. fast doesn't actually start burning fat at 6 p.m. It starts whenever insulin clears. Depending on what you ate, that could be 7 p.m., 8 p.m., sometimes later. The second worker is your liver. It's been stocking shelves all day, converting glucose into glycogen, your quick-access fuel tank. Think of it like cash in your wallet. Your body always spends the wallet cash before it goes to the bank. The liver doesn't touch fat stores until that tank gets low enough. How full it is at 6 p.m. determines how long the early phase lasts. Ate a big carb-heavy dinner. That wallet is stuffed. You're spending it all night before you ever reach the bank. The third worker is cortisol, and this one is sneaky. Cortisol at 6 p.m. is supposed to be doing one thing: declining. Low cortisol at night is what allows the fat-burning hormones to operate without interference. But if your afternoon was stressful, work pressure, bad traffic, an argument, a hard training session without recovery, cortisol doesn't come down on schedule, it lingers. And lingering evening cortisol has one very specific job when it comes to belly fat. It locks it down. So at 6 p.m. you've got 3 situations playing out simultaneously: insulin clearing, liver burning through glycogen, cortisol either cooperating or interfering. The quality of your entire overnight fast depends on how those 3 things resolve. Most guys have zero visibility into any of them. They just stop eating and hope for the best. Now, this next part is where it gets interesting, because what happens in the next 2 hours is where most fasts live and die, and almost nobody talks about it. 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Nothing dramatic is happening. Insulin declining, liver burning glycogen, cortisol hopefully following its curve down. This is the runway, not the flight, the runway. What happens here determines whether your body takes off into real fat burning tonight or just idles until morning. I've seen 2 things wreck this runway over and over. Neither of them feels dangerous. That's exactly why they're so destructive. The first is eating too close to your 6 p.m. cutoff. I had a guy, engineer, disciplined as hell, been fasting 8 months, waist hadn't moved in 6 weeks. Turns out he was finishing dinner at 5:50 p.m., technically fasted by 6, but his body was just getting started processing that meal when the clock hit. Insulin spike, full liver, cortisol still elevated from his commute. His fast ran in neutral for the first 3 hours every single night. We pushed his last meal to 4:30 p.m. 3 weeks later, 2 inches off his waist. Same window, different starting point. Sound familiar? The cutoff matters less than the gap you give yourself before it. The second runway killer is what you drink after 6 p.m. Diet sodas and zero-calorie sweetened drinks can trigger a small insulin response, just enough to slow the transition. And alcohol, your liver immediately drops everything else to process ethanol. Same night, same discipline, completely different biological outcome. The runway phase is invisible. Nothing hurts, nothing feels wrong, and that's exactly when most guys make the decisions that extend it without realizing it. Now, once the runway ends and you're finally in fat-burning territory, there's something nobody is watching for that can pull you right back out, and most guys have no idea it's even happening. I put together a complete breakdown in the pinned comment. The exact meal composition, the gap timing, what to drink, and what kills the runway. Everything you need before your next fasting window, laid out in one place. Grab it now so you have it ready. And if this is already changing how you think about your evenings, hit subscribe, because we're just getting started. Somewhere around hour 2 to 4, assuming the runway went smoothly, your body crosses into a different gear. Insulin is low, glycogen is depleting, the doors to your fat cells start opening. Here's where most guys get it completely wrong. They assume all belly fat is the same, that once the fat-burning switch flips, everything starts going. First come, first served. That's not how it works. The fat accessed first is subcutaneous fat, the layer just under the skin. The stuff you can grab, that starts mobilizing early in a good fast. Fine. But visceral fat? The deep fat packed around your liver and intestines, the kind that actually drives heart disease and insulin resistance. That fat doesn't give itself up easily. It has more cortisol receptors than any other fat in your body. Honestly, the fat that matters most for your health is also the fat your body protects hardest. It's almost insulting. Think of visceral fat like a tenant who's been in the building for years and knows all the exits. When the landlord shows up, that's your fat-burning hormones. The tenant turns off the lights and waits it out. But when the building is calm and cortisol is quiet, the tenant has no excuse to stay hidden. The alarm is cortisol. If your evening cortisol never came down, your visceral fat sits untouched all night, protected, while you sleep convinced you're making progress. Ever feel like you've been fasting for months and the waist just isn't moving? That specific belly pouch that refuses to go anywhere. That's not your genetics. That's probably this. Real talk. How long have you been fasting consistently and still feel like that belly pouch just won't move? Because I'm betting a lot of you right now have been at it for months, doing the work, and still staring at the same waist measurement. Drop how long you've been fasting in the comments. And if you already figured out something that finally moved the needle, say that too. Because that information is worth more than anything I can tell you. And here's what makes it worse. The overnight hours, the ones where you're asleep and completely unaware, are actually your most powerful fat-burning window. Growth hormone kicks in during deep sleep, targets fat stores directly, protects muscle, and runs cleanest when insulin is low and fasting is active. All three conditions overlap during an overnight fast. But it gets suppressed by a late snack, blunted by poor sleep, and crushed by elevated cortisol. Same character. Again. Most guys think the overnight fast is passive. It's not. It's the most active biological event of your day. You're just not awake for it. Now here's the part that frustrates me every time I see it, because the fix is sitting right in front of everyone and nobody's pointing at it. The entire fasting conversation is about the eating window. What to eat, when to eat, how to break the fast. And that stuff matters. I'm not dismissing it. But it treats the fasting window like an empty container that just needs to be big enough. The fasting window is not empty, it's a sequence. And the most common place that sequence breaks isn't during the fast. It's in the hour before it starts. I had another guy, mid-40s, fasting 18 hours a day for 5 months, waist stuck for 2 months straight, convinced his body was broken. We didn't touch his window. We changed his last meal, less refined carbs, more protein, moved it 90 minutes earlier, added a short walk after dinner to help cortisol come down. 6 weeks later, nearly 3 inches off his waist. Same discipline, better sequence. The guy who commits hardest is often the one who gets stuck longest, because he's grinding against a biological sequence instead of working with it. And nobody told him. So here's the Kong approach, not a 12-step overhaul, one lever. Your last meal. Lower refined carbs means your liver isn't maxed out when the window opens. More protein means your body enters the fast feeling resourced instead of threatened, which is the direct signal that keeps cortisol lower overnight. And eating that meal with a real gap before your cutoff, 90 minutes minimum, 2 hours is better, means insulin has already started declining before your fast even begins. One meal. Slightly different composition. Eaten earlier than you're probably eating it right now. That's it. The downstream effects run all night, shorter runway, cleaner transition into fat burning, quieter cortisol, growth hormone running properly, visceral fat that doesn't have a biological excuse to stay locked up. The Kong lifestyle has always been about removing friction, not adding suffering. This particular piece of friction is sitting right at the start of your fast every single night, and most guys don't even know it's there. Everything I just laid out, the last meal framework, how to manage evening cortisol, and the exact setup that gets the overnight sequence running, it's all compiled in the pinned comment. No need to rewatch or take notes. Grab it, apply it tonight, and start paying attention to what your body actually does differently in the morning. And if you want to keep going this deep on what's really happening while you fast, subscribe, because this is exactly where we live. Let me tell you what actually changes, because it shows up in ways you might not expect. The first thing most guys notice is that the fast gets easier. You wake up feeling like something happened, instead of just feeling like time passed. Less aggressive hunger in the first hour. That's not psychological, that's your body coming out of an active sequence instead of a stalled one. The second shift is the late-night cravings. When cortisol is elevated in the evening, it drives carb cravings. Your body in stress mode wants quick fuel. When evening cortisol comes down properly, that after-dinner pull toward the kitchen loses its power. Not willpower, biology. And the third shift, the slow one, the one that matters, is your waist. Visceral fat responds to a pattern, not a single good night. But guys who fix their 6 p.m. setup and run that sequence consistently for 3 to 4 weeks start seeing waist measurements move in a way that wasn't happening before. The landlord shows up and the tenant is actually home. Not from a longer fast, not from cutting more food, from understanding what the sequence needs and giving it that. Look, minus 6 p.m. is not a magic number. It's a starting point, and what it starts depends entirely on the conditions you created before it. Your body doesn't respond to rules, it responds to biological environments. The friction in your fast right now isn't coming from lack of discipline, it's coming from a sequence you didn't know existed, and now you do. Starting tonight, look at what you're eating before 6 p.m. Is the composition setting up a clean runway? Is there a real gap before your cutoff? Did your afternoon leave cortisol elevated and ready to lock everything down? 3 questions. That's the audit. Do it tonight. Do it consistently, and watch what happens to that waist. Your belly fat isn't stubborn because you're not fasting long enough. It's stubborn because the sequence isn't running. Fix the sequence, the results follow. Gorilla mind. Know the game you're playing. Go focus on the carcass.